The theme for this program is, as Jehovah's sheep reject the voice of strangers. When he, that is the shepherd, has brought all his own out, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers. Please ask yourself, as one of Jehovah's figurative sheep, do I obediently respond to the voice of the fine shepherd and flee from the voice of strangers? Let's discuss 3 examples of how our fine shepherd tells us one thing, but Satan's underlings or strangers tell us something opposite. We must be vigilant to listen to the right voice. Our fine shepherd tells us, as our first example, these words at Matthew chapter 24, verses 45 through 47. Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on coming finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. We know the Master Jesus found the faithful and discreet slave spiritually feeding right-hearted ones in 1919, and at a future time will appoint him over all his belongings. So what's the implication? Obviously, even now, Jesus fully trusts the faithful slave. And all of us, even individual members of the governing body, should do the same. But what does the voice of strangers say on this subject? Don't trust the faithful slave. He will mislead you. And who often have the loudest voice promoting this false message? Apostates.
So, in this important broadcast message, Stephen Lett says we should listen to Jesus and reject the voice of strangers. Excellent advice for anyone desiring to be a true Christian. In fact, we have God Himself, audibly speaking from heaven, commanding us to do this.
While he was still speaking, look, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And look, a voice out of the cloud said,
"This is my Son, the Beloved, whom I have approved. Listen to him."
But for his first example, he turns to Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 24 verses 45 through 47, and highlights the importance of trusting the faithful and discreet slave, which, for Jehovah's Witnesses, since the year 2013, consists of the 8 members of the governing body. But let's think about this. Where in Matthew chapter 24, or in any one of the gospel accounts for that matter, does Jesus command his disciples to trust the faithful slave? Where does Jesus say that he himself trusts the slave? To my knowledge, there is no place where Jesus ever commands Christians to put their complete trust in humans. If he didn't say it, how are we supposed to listen to it? In fact, his Father tells us just the opposite. Do not put your trust in princes nor in a son of man, who cannot bring salvation. Would Jesus tell us to do something that was forbidden by his Father? Jesus' disciples knew the importance of obeying that command.
In answer, Peter and the other apostles said,
"We must obey God as ruler, rather than men."
There is ample evidence in the Bible that, rather than being a prophecy about Jesus, making an appointment of a composite slave or governing body, 2,000 years in the future, to explain the Bible, his words are a parable that applies to all his disciples individually and extends to all Christians today. See the video, A Simpler Approach to the Faithful and Discreet Slave. I'll place a link in the description below. However, for the sake of argument, let's take the Watchtower Society's interpretation, that Jesus appointed a composite slave. Right in the context, it indicates that Jesus does not completely trust that slave. Consider.
Happy is that slave
if his master on coming finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. But if ever that evil slave says in his heart, My master is delaying, and he starts to beat his fellow slaves, and to eat and drink with the confirmed drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day that he does not expect, and in an hour that he does not know, and he will punish him with the greatest severity, and will assign him his place with the hypocrites. There is where his weeping and the gnashing of his teeth will be.
Notice the word, if. Why would Jesus say happy is that slave, if? Would he not rather have worded that, happy is that slave, when his master on coming finds him doing so? If his trust in him was complete? Why later would he introduce the possibility of the slave becoming wicked, and warn what would happen in that case, if he fully trusts the slave, and that outcome were not possible? Does that make sense to you? How does the Watchtower explain this? Consider what is said in the July 15, 2013 issue.
Jesus warned about an evil slave who concludes in his heart that the master is delaying and who starts to beat his fellow slaves. When the master arrives, said Jesus, he will punish that evil slave with the greatest severity. Matthew 24:48-51 reads, But if ever that evil slave should say in his heart, My master is delaying, and should start to beat his fellow slaves, and should eat and drink with the confirmed drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day that he does not expect, and in an hour that he does not know, and will punish him with the greatest severity, and will assign him his part with the hypocrites. There is where his weeping and the gnashing of his teeth will be. Was Jesus foretelling that there would be an evil slave class in the last days? No. Granted, some individuals have manifested a spirit similar to that of the evil slave described by Jesus. We would call them apostates, whether they were of the anointed or of the great crowd. But such ones do not make up an evil slave class. Jesus did not say that he would appoint an evil slave. His words here are actually a warning directed to the faithful and discreet slave. Notice that Jesus introduces the warning with the words, if ever. One scholar says that in the Greek text, this passage for all practical purposes is a hypothetical condition. In effect, Jesus was saying, if the faithful and discreet slave were ever to mistreat his fellow slaves in these ways, this is what the master will do when he arrives. However, the composite faithful and discreet slave has continued to keep on the watch and to provide nourishing spiritual food. The anointed brothers who together serve as the faithful slave recognize that they are accountable to the master for the way they care for his domestics. The heartfelt desire of these anointed brothers is to fulfill their responsibility loyally, so that they might hear a well done from the master when he finally arrives.
So, from this, we are to understand that Jesus gave a warning about something that was impossible to occur. Does that sound right to you? Or does this explanation sound like the voice of a stranger, altering the message? If someone came along claiming to represent Jesus, but altering and adding to his words, saying you should put your complete trust in them, rather than in Jesus' words, does that not sound like the stranger that Jesus warned about? If they go on to claim that your relationship to God, your very salvation, depends on completely trusting them and their interpretation of what Jesus meant, does that not sound like what the Apostle Paul warned would happen?
I know that after my going away oppressive wolves will enter in among you, and will not treat the flock with tenderness. And from among you yourselves men will rise and speak twisted things to draw away the disciples after themselves.
Think about it. Why would God provide the Bible and make it widely available to the vast majority of Earth's population, but only give the ability to understand it correctly to 8 men? Do you really think it is impossible For God to observe the reaction of men, who come in contact with His Word, whenever and wherever they live, down through time, observe their reaction and take note of it Himself, without the aid of a human organization. Is that not what Jesus meant, when He said, "I will be with you all the days, until the conclusion of the system of things"?